This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real events. Names, dates, locations, and identifying details have been changed or dramatized to protect privacy and enhance the narrative. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental or used fictitiously. This content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not aim to glorify crime, promote violence, or pass judgment on real individuals. Viewer discretion is advised. Some scenes may contain mature, disturbing, or triggering content. What you are about to watch could have happened anywhere, to anyone. It's inspired by real events. Whispers of truth, buried beneath layers of fiction. We've changed the names, the dates, the locations, but the emotions, the betrayal, the fear, those are real. This story is not meant to accuse, only to reveal, to make you question, who do you really trust? If stories like this keep you thinking, long after they end, hit subscribe, smash like, and drop your theory in the comments. Now watch closely, before the truth disappears again.
Linda Carter was 67, and her days were painted with the soft, ordinary colors of small-town Texas life. She rose early, watering the stubborn roses that bloomed against the summer heat. She rocked gently on her porch swing with a book in her lap, waving to neighbors with the kind of smile that made people feel at ease. Her home carried the scent of cinnamon from Sunday baking, the clink of mismatched mugs in her cupboards, and the warmth of a woman who had spent a lifetime giving more than she ever asked for. She was remembered for laughter that rang out during family gatherings, for stories told with the sparkle of memory, and for the way she made others feel less alone. Linda's life, though modest, seemed safe. Peaceful. Rooted. Nothing about her world suggested it would ever be shaken. But peace can be deceptive. Behind the gentle hum of daily rituals, time was moving toward a moment that would unravel everything. A hospital bed, bright fluorescent lights, and a folded note pressed urgently into her palm. How does an ordinary life turn into a chilling warning? How does a woman who gave so much find herself told to run? Linda Carter's world seemed ordinary, almost comfortingly so. Her one-story home sat quietly at the edge of town, its roses pushing stubbornly against the Texas sun. Inside, the smell of cinnamon often lingered from Sunday baking, a tradition she had kept alive long after her family stopped gathering as often. Her walls carried decades of history, photographs of vacations, birthdays, milestones now frozen in time. A quilt she had stitched years ago rested on her couch, faded but full of meaning. Friends described her as devoted, selfless, the kind of woman who worked harder than she should have just to give more than she ever kept for herself. But beneath the surface, cracks showed. Bruises appeared in places she could not easily explain. In the middle of summer, she wore long sleeves to the store. At church, her voice trembled when asked simple questions. A neighbor remembered late-night shouting that stopped abruptly when footsteps approached the window. Another recalled how Linda's once easy laugh now sounded forced, like she was performing happiness rather than living it. Her health, too, seemed to decline faster than age alone could explain. She moved more slowly, often dizzy, sometimes too weak to finish even small chores. She told friends she was just getting old, but her eyes betrayed something heavier, fear disguised as fatigue. To most in her community, she was still the gentle woman with roses in her yard. But those who looked closer knew something wasn't right. And soon, that unease would turn into undeniable proof, under the harsh, sterile lights of a Texas hospital. The breaking point came on an ordinary evening. Linda collapsed in her living room, her body trembling with a weakness she could no longer push aside. She was rushed to the hospital, pale and disoriented, her breathing shallow. Staff expected the usual complications of age, dehydration, fatigue, perhaps high blood pressure. But within minutes, it was clear this wasn't routine. The injuries didn't fit. Dark bruises wrapped around her wrists, both sides, as if she had been gripped or restrained. Faint abrasions traced her arms in patterns no fall could explain. Her blood work told another story, traces of sedatives, drugs Linda had never been prescribed. More disturbing than her injuries was her silence. When asked about her health, Linda hesitated. Her answers were brief, rehearsed, and sometimes contradicted the medical evidence in front of them. Nurses noticed how she glanced toward her son before speaking, as though waiting for permission. Doctors had seen this before, not random illness, but a pattern of control and harm. The physician on duty felt the weight of urgency. He could not accuse openly. He could not confront in the moment. But he could warn her. During a routine check, he pressed a folded note into Linda's hand, quick enough not to be seen. Her fingers trembled as she opened it under the blanket. 5 words, scrawled in hurried ink, shattered the fragile wall of denial she had built. Run from your son. Linda's pulse quickened. The fluorescent lights above her seemed harsher now, her breath shorter. She had come to the hospital expecting care, but what she received was something far more terrifying, a warning that the real danger was not her failing body, but the one person she trusted most. The note in Linda's hand was only the beginning. By law, the hospital had to act. The doctor who wrote it filed a formal report, a quiet but urgent declaration that Linda's condition bore the marks of abuse. His voice was steady as he signed the paperwork, but his eyes betrayed unease. He knew the weight of what he was setting in motion. Police arrived that same evening, cautious at first. Elder neglect, accidental falls, or medication mix-ups were common explanations. The bruises on Linda's wrists could have been from bracing herself in a fall. Her slurred speech, perhaps side effects of age or illness. Nothing, on the surface, demanded the word crime. In the neighborhood, theories spread like wildfire. Some insisted prowlers had been casing the area, frightening the elderly into accidents. Others muttered about scams, strangers tricking Linda out of money and leaving her shaken. Detectives tested these possibilities. They searched Linda's home for signs of forced entry but found none. Surveillance from nearby streets showed no prowlers. Pharmacy logs revealed she had never been prescribed the sedatives in her blood. Each explanation collapsed as quickly as it was raised. And with every door that closed, suspicion narrowed. What looked like chance or misfortune was beginning to harden into something deliberate. And the circle of possibilities wasn't widening outward, it was tightening inward. The danger to Linda wasn't from the shadows outside her home. It was already inside. The science stripped away the last illusions. Linda's toxicology results showed repeated doses of sedative strong enough to dull her mind but not enough to kill her. These were not accidental. Someone had been deliberately controlling her body, her will, her silence. The injuries confirmed the pattern. The bruises on both wrists bore the telltale signs of restraint. Not random, not clumsy, but deliberate pressure, as if someone had gripped her tightly again and again. Then came the finances. Bank investigators combed through Linda's accounts and uncovered a chilling trail. Thousands of dollars had drained away in the past year, funneled into secondary accounts. When police followed the trail, the path led straight to her son. Even more disturbing were the documents uncovered in Linda's own home. Among her drawers was a file of old paperwork, a tangle of savings bonds and stock certificates she had long forgotten. Buried in the pile was an inheritance of oil company shares, worth far more than she had ever spoken about. Linda treated them as scraps of paper. But to someone desperate, they were a fortune. Drafts of new legal documents surfaced too, attempts to change her power of attorney, to alter her will. Each change placed more of Linda's assets, her independence, her very future, into her son's name. The picture was no longer blurred. Linda wasn't simply sick. She was being slowly weakened, isolated, and stripped of everything she had built over a lifetime. Had the hospital not intervened, Linda Carter might not have lived long enough to understand the betrayal. When detectives first brought Linda's son into the interview room, he looked relaxed, too relaxed. He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, speaking in the careful tone of a man rehearsing lines. He insisted the money transfers were just help with bills. The bruises? She falls often, he said, smiling faintly, as though the explanation required no further thought. But as the questions grew sharper, his mask began to slip. Detectives pointed out that the bruises on her wrists were mirrored, impossible to get from a fall. They presented the toxicology reports showing sedatives in her blood. They asked why pharmacy records showed no prescription. He shifted in his chair, leaning forward now, his hands tightening into fists. His voice lost its calm rhythm, turning sharp, defensive. "You don't understand," he snapped, before retreating back into silence. The contradictions piled up. He claimed Linda had willingly signed checks, but bank tellers described her pale face, her trembling hand, her eyes darting toward him for approval. He said she had given him money, but records showed transfers made while she was hospitalized. Neighbors, once certain of his devotion, now whispered in disbelief. One remembered seeing him guide her into church, steadying her arm, calling her "Mama" with tenderness. Another recalled how Linda had told them softly, "He takes care of everything for me." The same words that once sounded proud now rang with dread. Detectives didn't need his confession. They had the bruises, the blood work, the money trail. But more than that, they had the silence, the long pauses between his words, the tension in his body as each piece of evidence narrowed the walls around him. The interview ended not with answers, but with a certainty. The truth was coming, and it would be decided in the one place no performance could protect him, the courtroom. The trial of Linda's son opened with a silence that felt heavier than words. The courtroom brimmed with neighbors, friends, and strangers who had come to watch the story unfold. The prosecution began its staircase of evidence. Toxicology reports were displayed on a glowing screen, traces of sedatives in her system, administered consistently over months. Forensic experts showed photographs of her wrists, bruises so symmetrical they could only have come from restraint. Financial analysts traced the missing money, transfer by transfer, into his accounts. And then came the documents, drafts of revised wills and power of attorney, with his name marked as sole beneficiary. Each piece landed like a hammer blow. The defense fought back with everything it had. They painted him as a devoted son, overwhelmed by the crushing responsibility of caring for an aging mother. They argued that Linda was confused, forgetful, unreliable in her memory. They claimed she had given him money willingly, signed documents knowingly. They framed his presence at the bank not as coercion, but as protection. It was a portrait of misunderstanding, not malice. But then, Linda herself entered the courtroom. Frail but determined, she walked slowly to the witness stand. Her voice shook at first, but each word gained strength. She described the dizziness after meals, the unexplained drowsiness, the feeling that she was being slowly silenced. She remembered papers pushed toward her, urged to sign without explanation. She recalled the nights she lay in bed, too weak to move, wondering why her own home no longer felt safe. Her words pierced the silence. A woman who had raised a son with everything she had was now describing, under oath, how he had taken from her not just money, but freedom. The defense tried to cast doubt, but the jury's faces told the story. Pens scratched furiously against notepads. Some jurors leaned forward, others folded their arms, but none looked away. When the arguments ended, the jury filed out to deliberate. The room held its breath. The evidence was strong. The defense had clawed at shadows. And at the heart of it all was Linda, a mother who had survived to tell her story, but only just. The question now was not whether she had been betrayed. It was whether the law would name that betrayal for what it was. When the jury returned, the courtroom fell silent. Every eye followed them as they filed in, carrying not just the weight of evidence, but the weight of a mother's survival against her own child. The foreman stood. The words were steady, final. Guilty. Linda's son was convicted on charges of aggravated elder abuse, financial exploitation, and attempted murder. The sentence was heavy, not just for the crimes, but for the betrayal. In the gallery, some gasped, others wept. And Linda, frail but alive, lowered her head and let the tears fall. For the community, the verdict was a reckoning. How could devotion twist into greed? How could a bond meant to protect turn into a weapon of control? People spoke of Linda's courage, of the hospital staff's vigilance, and of the justice system finally giving voice to someone who had nearly been erased in silence. But for Linda, the verdict was more than punishment. It was survival. It was proof that her story had been heard, that her suffering had not been dismissed as confusion, nor her life reduced to a footnote. She had endured what many never speak of, betrayal within blood, and lived to see the truth named out loud. Her name now carried more than history. It carried warning. A reminder that abuse can hide in the places we least expect, that trust can be manipulated, and that silence can be deadly. In the end, it wasn't just the jury's voice that mattered. It was Linda's. Subscribe for more true crime investigations that uncover the darkest truths hidden in plain sight.